Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome National Editor, Forbes magazine, Quentin Hardy.
Thank you very much. As you know, there are two great themes at this conference, excuse me. I see a crowd like this, and I expect you to hold up matches. As you know, there are two great themes. The one you saw coming in, the Rosetta Stone, which is the skeleton key to several great civilizations, clearly isolated and reflecting each other. It took a lot of brain work, but people could come at it in a systemic way. And the other one that you're hearing up on stages like this, in conference rooms and among each other, is the growth of the cloud. Depending on your religion, the cloud is either all of your data or a great deal of your data coming soon, and it's geographically remote and ultimately not really significant. It's just sort of out there somewhere. Your data is shared, passed around, used in varieties of purposes. The user might be, the owner of the data at the time might be the government, it might be a phone company, it might be a bank, it might be Facebook, it could even be you, who knows. And this is a fascinating issue from a security point of view. Cybersecurity issues around what identity means, what boundaries are anymore. I spoke of the Rosetta Stone as having hard and fast boundaries. We don't really have boundaries like this in the world we're building. A great example for security is what recently happened with Google in China. You know, they announced this hack, and it appears to come from a university. Well, was it university students? The university is kind of related to the Chinese military. Was it the military? Was it criminals? Was it hackers? Was it somebody elsewhere who hijacked their servers? Was it the Chinese government? And the answer is a resounding, I don't know, yeah, probably, something like that. You look at what happens in Russia, around Georgia. There are attacks inside the government, destabilizing it before the Russian army comes in. So, the boundaries of identity about what a criminal attacker is, what a government attacker is, what something in between is, we don't know. And our own responses in some ways. Is this a responsibility of our government? Is it a responsibility of the private sector? Do you get ad hoc bands of good guys coming together to try to stop it? And again, the answer is a bit of everything at this point. From a privacy point of view, we have issues around, well, is this core? How do we know what's core? What is our privacy? What is our appropriate role for this? And here to solve all of these questions in the next 37 minutes and 26 seconds, we have three experts in the field. Please welcome Michael Chertoff, Richard Clarke, and Marc Rotenberg. Hey, y'all. So, Michael, I'll start with you. You recently carried out an exercise around this called Cyber Shockwave. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and what the outcome of the exercise was?
This was staged by the Bipartisan Policy Center, which is a bipartisan group that tries to elucidate the facts surrounding complicated public issues. In this case, there was a hypothetical attack on our communications networks using a botnet and a follow-on attack on the power grid. And we reenacted a National Security Council meeting, the idea being to lay on the table some of the issues that would emerge in that kind of attack, both the dimensions of the consequences, but beyond that, some of the unsettled, unresolved questions of authority, strategy, and implementation that would come into play if we had to respond to an attack.
What was the stop point of the exercise?
The stop point of the exercise was a general consensus among the group, which were basically former senior public officials, that the president would have to take vigorous action both in the world of cyber in terms of shutting down parts of the network and requiring certain kind of response on the network, and also in the physical world, because there would be consequences in terms of the ability to secure facilities in that kind of a disordered environment that would require literally federalizing the National Guard and really imposing a serious set of restrictions. So I think it was a call for a dramatic and vigorous response, but a recognition that a lot of the contours of that have to be debated in advance.
But what was the timeline, and how bad did it have to get before the president was taking steps like that?
Well, you know, we operated over a period of about an hour and a half total, That was the dimension of the meeting. During that hour and a half, we saw an exponential increase in the degradation of the network, and then, of course, a blackout follows, and that spreads rapidly over the eastern seaboard. So instead of a crisis that unfolds over days and weeks, this was a crisis that unfolded in considerably less than 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. And I'll turn this to you, Richard. As you hear about an exercise like that, is the structure appropriate, and is that a reasonable timeline? Do you see something like that taking place in that context?
Well, if there's a major cyber war attack, it is. But what's really happening every day is that we are being attacked. We're being attacked by either the government or the criminal gangs, and there's very little difference, I think, between the two, from China and Russia. Mm-hmm. Every major company in the United States and in Europe, every major government institution has been successfully penetrated. Terabytes, petabytes of information have been extracted, and our firewalls don't stop it, our AV...
Well, is that industrial espionage or is that warfare?
It's industrial espionage, and it may never go to warfare. There are lots of important issues if it does. There are now 20 to 30 nations that have warfare units, cyberspace warfare units, including us. And we have no public strategy for how to fight cyber war. In fact, I don't think we have a private strategy, if the truth be known. But the day-to-day espionage that's going on is eliminating our economic competitiveness.
Do you feel like we're in a low-level war at this point? Something like the Cold War was, fought by proxies or indications of what could get worse?
I think what we have today is the government of China, and to some extent the government of Russia, and others, but mainly them, engaging in daily activities successfully that the United States government is not stopping and private industry is not stopping, and they're stealing anything that's worth stealing, terabytes of information. And we can't even stop them from exfiltrating it out of our corporations. And we're all here, talking about the cloud as though that were the most important issue, when there has been a quantum change over the last couple of years in the nature of what's going on in cyberspace, and we're not even talking about it.
Well, go ahead. What is it?
So it is these twofold things, that nation states have created cyber warfare units. They are preparing the battlefield. That's the Pentagon code phrase for what they're doing. The Wall Street Journal reported a few months ago that somebody had laced the U.S. electric power grid with logic bombs. That's not espionage. That's preparation for warfare.
Yeah.
And so are we doing that too? Are we doing that to China? Is that why China did it to us?
We'd be remiss not to in that scenario.
Well, are we creating a situation that the public doesn't know about, probably the Congress doesn't know about, where we are increasing tensions in cyberspace in a way that is destabilizing? Mm-hmm. So that's going on. That's relatively new. At the same time, you have this massive exfiltration of competitive data from corporations throughout the country, going in large measure to China and Russia. And all the little cyber devices that the companies here sell have been unable to stop that.
Mm-hmm. Now, Marc, as a privacy, civil rights advocate, when you hear people talking about federalizing the National Guard after an hour and a half of activity, or the state of war we are at without knowing it, how does that make you feel?
Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any real dispute about the need to improve network security, to recognize that there are threats to U.S. federal agencies, to U.S. firms, and I should say U.S. consumers. Those threats are real and they need to be addressed. I think the big questions are, what do we do? Do we give the government a lot more authority? Do we start authenticating all users? Do we start tracking all communications? This is where the debate really begins. Because as to the goal, I think all three of us would agree. I mean, we don't want a situation where the network is vulnerable, where services can be shut down, where consumers are at risk of identity theft. But we need to come up with solutions that are smart. And I think we've had the experience with the Clipper chip, for example, where some people said, if we have unbreakable encryption, that could pose a real risk to national security. We thought about some more and we realized, gee, if we have escrow key encryption, that's going to pose a risk to national security too. So we need good solutions, I think, to some of the